I want to welcome everybody to our committee meeting, the last committee meeting of 2010. I'm joined by council members Ed Reyes and Richard Alarcon. So we do have a quorum, and we can get started. Mr. City Attorney, before that, I think that everybody should acknowledge the fact that Anne Marie cut her hair. And it looks great.
Thank you.
It really, really does. With that said, you knew I was going to...
I knew. I told the people back in my office, don't listen. He's going to give me grief.
You did? Okay. Yeah, well,
I know. But I said I'd turn red.
I abused the staff. I don't know.
We'll end on a positive note.
End on a positive
I mean,
note?
it's the end of the year, so.
Yeah,
it's all
and the hair looks nice.
Hey, thanks.
I mean, you could look like the city attorney.
She needs a little more platinum blonde in there.
A little more platinum blonde. All right.
Oh,
Okay.
our city attorney. Oh, right here.
Yeah, no. All right. Yeah, we better get to 2011 real quick.
All right. Item 1?
Yes.
Okay. CRA report and joint resolution and CLA report relative to authorizing the expenditure of up to $4 million in bond proceeds for the Bureau of Street Services to perform streetscape improvements on Olympic Boulevard between Vermont and Western Avenues in the Wilshire Center Koreatown Recovery Redevelopment Project area.
Okay. On that issue, item, we'll adopt the CLA report. That brings us to item 2.
CRA report and CAO report relative to a cooperation agreement between the Department of General Services Standards Division for as-needed materials and environmental testing services.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Then we'll adopt the CAO report on that item, item 3.
CRA report and CLA2 report relative to a public hearing on the proposed disposition of properties located at 324 to 330 West Venice Boulevard, 1515 to 1521, and 1600 to 1610 South Hope Street to CHMC Hope Street Family Center Property Management LLC, a loan increase of $655,000, execution of a disposition and development agreement and other related actions for the development, ownership, and management of a public recreation center at Pocket Park, the Venice Hope Recreation Center, and the City Center Redevelopment Project area.
Okay, we'll forward that to council without recommendation. Item 4.
LAHD and CRA reports and CAO report relative to an agreement with the LAHD to provide $164,000 to fund the extension of the Hollywood Scattered Site master leasing agreement with Path Ventures to provide rent subsidies to formerly homeless individuals and families in the Hollywood and East Hollywood redevelopment project areas.
Okay, we'll adopt the CAO report on that item. That brings us to item 5.
LAHD report and resolution relative to adoption of a resolution and minutes of the public hearing pursuant to the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act of 1982 for the 5555 Hollywood, Delray Square Senior Housing, Menlo Family Housing, and NoHo Senior Villas projects.
Okay, we'll adopt the Housing Department report and resolution. Item 6.
LHD and CAO reports relative to amending contracts to extend the terms and increase contract amounts for the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS HOPWA program and release of a request for proposal to select new contractors for the HOPWA program.
Okay, we'll adopt the CAO report on that, and that brings us to item 7.
CDD and CAO reports relative to an application to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Food, and Nutrition Service for the Hunger-Free Communities Grant Program for the development of a proposed food stamp outreach and enrollment program and grant match in community development block grant funds.
Okay, so on item 7, we'll adopt the CAO report. So without objection, all of these items will be deemed approved. Okay, now Mr. Reyes, I understand that you might have some questions on items 8 and 9.
Yeah.
Are you the droid? Is that you? Okay. Did you guys see the...
I don't know how to turn it on.
Trust me, anyway. I liked it better when we just had beepers, then I could handle that. But did you guys see
What's a beeper?
the football game with the Jets? and the coach stuck his knee out and tripped that guy? I don't know what made me think about that. Maybe the droid sound. Okay, if we could read items 8 and 9.
8 and 9, okay. LHD and CAO reports relative to the 2011 calendar year Affordable Housing Trust Fund, notice of funding availability, and report back on actions related to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And item 9, communication from the mayor relative to a progress report on the Housing That Works plan.
Okay, why don't we bring everyone up, and we'll listen to their report, and then there, I think, will be some questions. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. I'm Angelica Samayoa with the CAO's office. I can provide an overview for item number 8,
Please.
and I'll try to be brief, as I know the department has all the details that you'll be looking for. But just to advise you that the CAO recommendations on this item number 8 recommend approval of the Housing Department's recommendations as presented in their transmittal dated November 30th, and then revised on December the 3rd. This request includes authority to issue 3 rounds of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund NOFA in 2011. For round 1, the department identified $25.5 million in funds available to the NOFA, to the round 1 NOFA, to the extent that the projects meet the eligibility and use requirements per fund source. As proposed, $15 million will be available to permanent supportive projects serving homeless individuals and families, and $10.5 million for affordable housing projects. The CAO report includes an attachment, which are the very last documents, which includes highlights that highlights the key changes to the 2011 NOFA, such as the incorporation of new at-risk assessment criteria. The attachment also includes 6 items that arose subsequent to the release of the 2 department transmittals. Where applicable, you will see references to where this information is located in the proposed NOFA for reference purposes, and the department can provide an explanation of the overall recommendations.
Good morning, Helmi Heserick, Los Angeles Housing Department, and this is the first round of 2011 NOFA. Affordable Housing Trust Fund, $25 million is stated for affordable housing in anticipation of the first round of TCAC in March. And within this NOFA, we are proposing to set aside $15 million, or at least allow $15 million to be focused on permanent supportive housing for homeless. And this will be done in coordination with the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles. That's providing up to 250 project-based vouchers for homeless housing as well.
So that's 250, period.
Yes.
And hi, this is Tim Elliott with the Housing Department. The changes that we've made to the notice since last year are primarily to align our regulations with state regulations for tax credits and Prop 1C funds, which are available again. And so we had to have a selection criteria to determine, homeless projects are competing against other homeless projects statewide, and then the senior and family projects are competing for tax credits allocated to Los Angeles County. And we've come up with a scoring system which will rank them equally, whether they're applying for tax credits or bonds. And then, as mentioned before, we've commissioned a study through a grant from the MacArthur Foundation to help us assess the nature of the at-risk nature of HUD-assisted properties that are at risk of going to market. And we had to suspend that activity last year because we got an overwhelming response to the NOFA for those types of projects, and we didn't have a clear understanding of who really is at risk of converting the market and losing their affordability. And we hired a consultant that's nationally known and has given us best practices to rank the at-risk nature of these projects and establish a threshold criteria. So if projects meet this threshold criteria, they would be eligible for funding. The main thing is that projects it assesses their readiness to renew their Section 8 contract with HUD and mark the rents up to new market rents. And then we would know what, if any, gap there existed.
Okay, so you're going to do things, what's different, I mean, you've got this report. What'd you say it was from the MacArthur?
Well, we got a grant from the MacArthur Foundation.
Okay, so then they gave you some best practice ideas on how to evaluate. So what's different about it?
Well, what's different is that we'll be looking at we'll have a letter of intent from HUD to renew their contract for 20 years, and then we'll know what the real fair market rent, where HUD is going to set the real fair market rent. And whereas previously people came to us at an early stage and needed trust fund monies to acquire the building, and based on the tax credit rent, which maybe say would be $600 or $800, and then they would go to HUD and get marked up to $1,100 or $1,200, and then in most cases just pay our loan off. And we thought that was a bad use of long-term funds. So we've set up through a consortium of banks something called the New Generation Fund, which we guarantee the top 2% loss on any acquisition loan. And so this is a source of funds where somebody could acquire the building, hold it, negotiate with HUD to mark up, and then we'll know on the back end before we have to fund if there really is any gap. I mean, the HUD marks them up to market rents, and they shouldn't need any subsidy unless they're in a very expensive neighborhood or require extensive rehabilitation. And so we think that we're well positioned now to look at these projects, and those that really need help, we can move those forward into another 20 years of affordability.
Okay. Mr. Reyes, I think, had some questions.
Yes, and this is more for understanding of how we can work together as time comes past us. When we look at the criteria, has this criteria been applied in any other jurisdiction?
Well, this is based on best practices from the California Housing Partnership, which was actually created to deal with preservation issues some years ago. And
so has any other jurisdiction used it, so that, do we have any results from its implementation?
Not to our knowledge. I mean, not specifically. This was a study that was commissioned for Los Angeles based on its unique situation.
Okay. And is there a strategy in regards to the HUD buildings with maturing mortgages where there is no project-based Section 8 contracts? How are we contemplating that?
The term HUD mortgage usually denotes an FHA mortgage, which in and of itself doesn't have any affordability restrictions. So FHA loans could be refinanced, but that wouldn't trigger an increase in the rents. What really triggers an increase in the rents is the canceling of the Section 8 contract.
Run that by me one more time.
Okay. Well, the term HUD loan usually is an FHA insured loan, which is a somewhat below market rate, and it in and of itself doesn't have any affordability restrictions. Any private developer can go and get an FHA loan, but they come with a Section 8 contract, which can be terminated. They're 40-year loans, and 20 years in, they could opt out of the Section 8 contract. And theoretically, then the rents could increase. The people would get a tenant-based voucher. But then, if they moved away and took the voucher, there wouldn't be any affordability restrictions on that unit alone.
So does the criteria address the differences between the buildings that are HUD subsidized, as you described, a project that has a project-based Section 8 contract, HUD subsidized mortgage, or both, versus the CRA tax credit bond finance?
Let me, if I may, address this conversation about preservation in a little bit differently. We have been looking at preservation for approximately a year.
I appreciate what you're going to say, Helmy, but I'd like to have my question answered.
Uh-huh.
So are you going to answer my question?
Well, okay, let me hear the question again, please.
Okay. Given both the CRA and LHD received grant awards, let me phrase it this way. When we look at the criteria, and does it address the differences between the buildings that are HUD subsidized versus CRA, tax credit, and bond financed?
The criterion that is laid out in this NOFA for preservation is specifically for HUD subsidized Section 8. It ranks, it demonstrates a ranking and order of the total number of properties that are at risk of losing affordability. In an estimated 8,000 units in the city or 8,500 units in the city, approximately 5,400 are HUD subsidized Section 8 expiring contracts. So the focus has been on where the majority of expirations are likely to occur.
Okay, now those,
Prioritizing those.
the ones that you are referring to, CRA has,
No,
no,
these,
who manages these sections? The ones you just described,
HUD.
all of HUD, but administered by CRA, by,
Most of those are HUD contracts that are between the apartment owner and HUD itself,
or directly?
directly with HUD.
Okay.
There are, CRA does have covenants on many properties that are not HUD properties, and they may be expiring covenants, and the CRA has been looking closely at those properties, but they're not contained within this NOFA here, this ranking system.
So when we look at this criteria, I guess I'm looking at is as these restrictions expire, rents tend to go up. So when we look at how we're going to implement this criteria, how much are we going to be able to save? I mean, I want to get a feel for the coordination.
Well, if the restrictions expire and the building is subject to the rent stabilization ordinance, there's a cap on the rent increases that can happen.
I think there is a great deal of coordination between the agencies. Through the MacArthur Grant, we've been compiling a database of all of the potential expiration dates of affordability. And because every project most projects are kind of a layer cake of financing, they may have more than one way of being restricted. And what we've put together is a list of the most conservative restrictions, and we're approaching the restrictions that are most likely to come off first and trying to prioritize how we might put funding into those. The way this is prioritized in the NOFA, what we're putting into the NOFA today is really something to signal to the market about those projects that we think will require intervention by the city in a priority order. It's sort of, there are projects that could expire where the property owner is financially incentivized to re-up, and we really shouldn't be putting our money in those.
So I hate to cut you off like this, but it does lead to my next question. You're kind of going there, which is, given that both CRA and LAHD received grant awards to improve our funding strategy for this universe of units, how is CRA and LAHD going to coordinate in implementing this criteria? How will CRA prioritize funding preservation at-risk units? And how will LAHD coordinating with HACLA and HUD? How are we going to, you see what I'm saying is we've got these pool of funds coming in. We have three entities. There's a universe of units out there. So that's what I'm trying to get to. I think this criteria is a great start, but it's understanding this universe and how the three entities are actually working together. I'm trying to get to that.
Well, I think we are, as agencies, all in collaboration discussing this issue, and the MacArthur Grant has been very helpful in helping us even understand the universe. I think when we first started looking at this, we didn't quite understand the universe. Now we have a very clear understanding of what is expiring, and we are continuing to have a dialogue about which agency can move forward on which types of projects more easily, and how we might prioritize. And when we put this criteria into the NOFA here, this is really in anticipation of where we intend to head in the future, and we are discussing it with the other agencies. I think the CRA is here. want at some point to speak to their own preservation strategy.
And I think that'd be healthy, at least, Mr. Chair, in terms of this committee's awareness of how they're isolating these opportunities and how we're looking at a strategy given the universe and how it exists in terms of the challenges we have. Some of the tension here. Well, I'll stop here. I have a few more questions. I know that my colleagues want to...
Richard does, and after this, we'll ask CRA to come up as well.
Okay.
Mr. Alarcon?
Yeah, I'm trying to get my hands on the practical implementation of this program. I'm trying, what exactly are we going to be doing in terms, so somebody's building, my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is it's not necessarily 100% of the units in a building that fall into this category. It might be 30%, it might even be less. So I'm trying to get a sense, what are we going to be spending money on? Are we going to create, in essence, our own Section 8 program where we provide vouchers? What exactly are we going to be doing in terms of allocating cash to these buildings?
Well,
First of all, am I right that these buildings are not 100%?
in some cases, one of the criteria is what is the percentage of people with Section 8 vouchers in the building?
Okay.
And
What criteria? Where have you set it at?
well, there's a point system, and that's one of the factors, is the percentage of the Section 8 in the building, and the number of years that you have left to before the opt-out can be exercised. And so these are the factors that would help us
Okay.
tell which of the buildings that are really likely to flip.
Okay.
And those then would be able, then we'd be able to assess how much money we needed to put in to buy down the mortgage to the rate that the Section 8, if they renewed with HUD, that they could, that rent would service the debt. And if it didn't, then there'd be a gap, and we would look to fill it with federal or perhaps.
So in essence, we're first of all, the building has debt.
Right. Usually these have an FHA mortgage.
Yeah.
And it's
Usually, but not all of them.
well, what we're talking about here are those that have HUD-assisted mortgages.
Okay.
And have rental assistance.
Okay, so in essence, we are providing payment to keep the rents where they are.
Right. Well, the HUD sets the rents, but the rents, the amount that the mortgage, that the rents wouldn't cover the mortgage, would determine how much soft financing that we'd have to layer in to make it a feasible project.
Feasible meaning
Well,
people could afford the rent.
Right, so that the rents will cover the mortgage.
But however we do this, the point is to keep the rents low.
Well, the HUD sets the rents. People pay a third of their income, no matter what that is.
Guthrie's nodding yes, so I'm going to take that as a yes. But in the technical way we're doing it is to fund the debt.
Right, there'd be a second mortgage on the
To
property.
fill the gap.
Right.
Okay, so that greatly reduces the number of units that would qualify. By virtue of the percentage may be very low. It might be 3 apartments out of 20. They probably wouldn't be eligible for this program.
What, there are several layers of financing that are usually brought into this, and there's low-income housing tax credits on most of these projects that they'd be eligible for.
Yeah, here, let me get to the point, because in terms of our rationale for and our policies on which places we target, I'm not sure that it's best for us to invest in a building where the percentage of apartments is very low, when we could be building new units someplace else.
Well, that's what the criteria is designed to tease out, is where's the best place to put our funds.
Yeah, but I'm not getting a good sense of what that's going to look like.
Well, the
You're
buildings.
not telling me hard.
Right.
These
the
are
buildings
primary.
with- The buildings with the highest percentage of people that are at risk of losing their affordability.
So the scoring is going to be weighted for buildings that have the highest percentage of units
That's one of the main
and
factors.
large numbers of units.
Right. That's one of the main factors.
Do we have anyone here from CRA?
I do have,
Mr. Reyes, I want to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, sir.
Ed Gibson from CRA.
How you doing? Good morning.
Good morning.
When we look at the fact that we are releasing this NOFA with the understanding that part of the request is not to come back to continue rolling out the NOFAs, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
Part of this action.
right.
Okay. So I want to ask a very direct question. When do we start funding at-risk preservation units? Does it begin now? Is it the second round? Is it the third round?
If somebody were to put together an application and met the threshold criteria, they would be eligible for funding in this round.
Okay, okay. I understand that we don't have a crystal ball. I understand that we don't know what's going to come forward. But the reason why I'm pushing preservation so hard is that in certain parts of the city, that's the most efficient, economical approach to maintaining affordable housing. So how are we going, I mean, it kind of sounds like we're leaving it to happenstance. It's if someone comes in. Understanding the relationship, but is it, I mean, there's messages being sent out.
I think let me see if I can answer it this way. In this NOFA, an applicant can come in for preservation, and we've laid out a criterion for funding preservation. There are projects that are, quote, at-risk preservation projects that when they are marked to market. One of the process is marking when the Section 8 contracts expire, you can go to HUD and you can mark up the rents to a market, so you can get the higher income on those Section 8 contracts. So they're actually financially viable without trust fund investment. And what we don't want to do is use trust fund dollars where the market can deliver the financing. And what we are looking at and we are going forward with for those types of projects where you don't really need to put trust fund dollars is making the new generation fund available as a source of private financing to get the mark-to-market projects to occur without plowing precious trust fund dollars into it, but still putting a source, basically a financing source, a mechanism for projects that are financially viable.
Does that lend itself to the notion of maybe perhaps having a number or a percentage that we should target where preservation is being realized? I mean, is the mayor's office here?
We have, we did have a preservation plan in the mayor's criteria, and it called for a number of preserving, and the departments have been taking that number seriously. However, what we've been doing in the process of studying it is refining the number, and we have not yet, at this point, developed separate goals separate from what was laid out initially in the plan. And that is something that we do need to do, is look at what can we, what was laid out in the mayor's plan was the preservation of 14,000 units of expiring covenants. What we've learned is there are not 14,000 expiring covenants in the next 5 years. There's 8,500.
Right.
And we have yet to determine what is financially feasible for us to achieve.
May I add on to Ed's question in this way? If we don't have designated allotments for the various categories of spending, then how are we going to determine the value of one project against another? In other words, if we don't know how much we're allocating for preservation, how are we going to compare a preservation project to a new project?
Well, the State Tax Credit Committee sets aside a portion of the credit allocation for at-risk projects, and that pretty much cap the available resources statewide for leveraging those kinds of projects. And so if we got an application that passed threshold, that we would look to match those resources with those state funds.
No, but you're not answering my question. My question is, we have a limited amount of funds. you're not segregating preservation money versus new money. I mean, it's all in the mix.
Not in this
So
NOFA.
we anticipate that the applications are going to be more than whatever we put out there. So at some point, there's going to be a convergence, and you're going to have to make decisions as to whether to fund preservation or whether to fund new. And I'm trying to get my hands around what is the criteria to distinguish which is better.
Well, I think the state sets aside 5% of its tax credits, and that basically would mean that we could finance that number of projects. Usually it's about 2 in the state every round. And when we have backed those projects, we usually are successful. And we just have to look at the other resources that are available to do this. And so effectively, we're limited by the other state resources.
Okay, I'm not an
But is
expert on
there-
this,
let me
but
ju-
my point is at some point...
let me jump in for 1 second,
You're
'cause
going to
that-
have one project competing
But-
against another.
He
I don't
asked
know what the
which one
criteria
was, I'm sorry, Richard, but because I usually let you guys go, but he asked which one was better. And I don't think you came close to an answer, and I don't mean to put you on
Well,
but I mean, is there an answer
do you
that
decide?
actually says, one is, can you answer the question that way?
well, we have the criteria.
I'm sorry, I just,
If we're in a
Know when you
situation
see
of
it.
being oversubscribed, we look at the gap versus their overall maximum loan amount, and those that could do it for the least amount would get selected first. And if there is no funds to convert one of these buildings, it may not be feasible for the owner to do it. There had been a lid on this for a long time, because you couldn't refinance a building with tax credits if the owner hadn't held it for 10 years. And in '08, there was the HERA tax bill, which took that off. And then we got a flood of applications, because every project was then theoretically possible to go to market. And we had to assess the risk of which ones really could, or which ones really were likely. A lot of people serve notice on their tenants that they intend to opt out just to keep their options open, but it may not be financially feasible to do that in many cases.
Here's my concern. My concern is that I understand you've designed this to have maximum flexibility, shift as policies change or as funding streams change. I get that. Problem is that the market doesn't have any clear picture of what their potential financing resources might be. So when they go to the bank, they may have difficulty convincing the bank that they're gonna get this other money, and so they may have problems packaging a concept of financing, because it's a lot easier when the city said, well, we got 3 million here, we got 10 million here, we got 5 million here. But when we're just saying we got 20 million altogether and we're not sure which ones we're gonna
Well,
do,
the thought
it makes it
is-
very difficult to put the financing
Right.
packages
Well,
together.
the thought is that this new generation fund, it's a $100 million fund, which the city basically controls. And that would be the pipeline of projects that we would pretty much guarantee that those were going to be there at the end, because we're guaranteeing the losses. And we see that as sort of the continuum of putting projects in the pipeline, and then they would go to an FHA-approved lender, and then ultimately to HUD. And
The new
then,
generation fund is flexible, it can go to any one of these.
See, but
Yes.
I was trying to, can I just finish?
No, go right ahead.
We take a step back and you look at the direction we're going. If we look at how we create affordable housing in areas that you typically wouldn't find them, when we start trying to build housing where the work is at, in those parts of the city, in my mind, there has to be a balancing point somewhere. And so the notion of preservation of affordable housing in places where we're not going to be building new housing or new affordability, you see, that's where I get a little nervous when we say we're going to open this up and see what comes. I think internally, we should be looking at the city and understanding some level of balancing. So at this juncture, we're going to be giving points and priorities to areas that are not so poverty-stricken, that are higher income, because we do want to put the labor force, the workers, working families, get them off the freeways and get them closer to where they work, better schools, etc. But where's the balancing point? And that's why I'm so emphatic about the preservation, understanding Section 8. I think Peter from HACLA's here. Are you familiar with the Section 8 and the questions we're asking in terms of how this could be folded into this decision-making? Because HACLA is a big part of this, and you're the other arm of housing here. CRA, Housing Department, and HACLA. I wish the mayor's office was here to give us a better sense of what the mayor's office is looking at and how they're prioritizing these funds, and how do they see preservation.
Well, certainly from the point of view of HACLA, we're very definitely participating in the overall housing plan that works, the Permanent Supportive Housing Program, and we've committed 250 vouchers for permanent supportive housing to this NOFA. So, our role in this is basically to support the permanent supportive housing side of it. The Section 8, the project-based Section 8 is on that's a direct HUD contract. We do get involved in conversions of Section 236 mortgages that convert, and other sorts of project-based HUD rental assistance that opt out of those programs. There is a tenant protection account at HUD for giving tenant-based vouchers to those folks. So we do that on a regular basis as well. It doesn't preserve a hard unit. It does preserve an affordability of a household in the city of Los Angeles. So on a continuing basis, we get that contract. When that family goes off contract, we renew that voucher and give it out to someone else. So it keeps a kind of affordability in the city, but it becomes tenant-based rather than hard unit-based.
Right. I think would be, you just said earlier that we're understanding the universe, that the analysis is coming back and we're getting a handle on, okay, what's the nature of this challenge? When we start speaking to thresholds, you're going to have a tsunami of applications coming in because financing is tough these days. You got projects that have backed up, projects that have fallen apart, projects that are on queue, lined up to be funded, and we only have so much money. So when we look at the criteria, how it has been set up, it has been set up where you can have more affordability in higher income areas. I mean, that seems to be the trend. And I understand that logic. I see the benefit in different levels. But I keep pulling back and saying, okay, but what about the preservation and existing densities and the poverties where those criteria won't be as strong in terms of points? So that's the balancing act I'm trying to understand. And I hate to have this free-for-all in the council if we can't give a sense of a picture. And if you're telling me now that the report is giving us that insight, we're beginning to formulate some kind of image that speaks to priorities and thresholds and how to move this money, perhaps that image could be a little bit clearer. Because right now we're kind of like, we're fighting with terminology, we're trying to understand concepts, and we're laying out strategies, but you've already got an approach. And that's what I'm trying to get to, a clear image of how you see this evolving. Understanding we have three very strong players on the stage. You got HACLA, CRA, and the Housing Department. And so that's what I'm looking for, and I'm trying to be helpful here. I'm trying to be constructive. But these are questions that are very real. You have 15 council districts that are very distinct, very different, with a whole range of needs, and so how do we respond to it? So, and you're going to have the housing advocates saying, why are we going to move all this money in the richer areas if we need it here desperately? And how are you going to preserve what we have here? How do we keep it from, believe it or not, Los Angeles Magazine made Pico Union the Tony neighborhood of the future. That's Pico Union. You know, people are being displaced now. So that's the tension that we're struggling with here. And it's daunting, I know. I mean, I can see it on your faces. Oh man, now what? But, you know, we have to find an approach, and I'm asking these questions, because they're going to come up, and we're going to have to make some decisions. In closing, Mr. Chair, I think if they're asking not to come back per NOFA, and I understand why, because of efficiency, perhaps we should be having report backs to see how the decisions are actually impacting the city, and is it really doing what we thought it would?
Okay, now I have absolutely no problem with that, but I did want to ask you, did you want to, move forward with item 8, and then we could continue 9 if you wanted, or what?
Yeah, I mean, because I think it'd be helpful for us to have the mayor's office giving us some indication of what the priorities are, how do they see the world, how are they going to influence the department heads that they can hire and fire. I mean, I hate to be so blunt, but these are the real issues that are in front of us, and we want to make sure we're moving in a constructive fashion.
Okay, well then at the appropriate time, I'll recommend that we adopt, I think it's the CAO report, where it relates to item 8. It's scheduled to be in council on Friday, and I want to make sure that occurs, but I don't see a problem in continuing the report back from the mayor's office. And I think, Richard, you had...
Yeah, it's a similar concern. It seems to me that the criteria leans towards properties that are sort of barren, like vacant properties. Much of the issues, and I know Ed shares this concern, that I have in my area are replacing blighted locations. They may have an existing building on them, and the criteria that's set forth in round 1 doesn't seem to lend itself to those projects that are going to need to demolish an old building or replace an old building. It leans to those that are building new, it seems. And I'm trying to get my hands around that, but is that the case? I don't believe that was the intent, but it seems that that's what's happening.
Well, many of our buildings that we finance are on infill sites that are, almost all of them are in redevelopment areas these days.
I'm sorry, what?
Most of the projects that we finance are jointly financed with the redevelopment agency and are in targeted areas, and there is replacement of blighted structures on a lot of our projects. There is vacant land, but typically there are underutilized parcels that are being redeveloped. And
I understand that, but what I'm saying is the point system seems to detract or reduce the opportunities for those that are demolishing blighted buildings and replacing with new.
I don't really think that that's the case. It's just basically what the land cost is.
You don't really think that's the case?
Well, we haven't seen that.
I was hoping to get a more firm answer. I'm not looking for something immediately on the spot. But since we're going to delay this matter, I'd really like to drill down and get a firm answer.
Are you talking about preservation projects or the whole Affordable Housing Trust
I'm talking
Fund?
about a project where we got, CRA by definition, blighted communities. Many of these properties are dilapidated. They need to either be completely rehabbed or demolished, but the criteria doesn't seem to give priority to that and give points for projects that are going to do that.
Well, it doesn't do that. It does give priority to projects that have leveraged other funds. So in a case where the CRA is active and has gone in to do the front-end pre-development work...
How am I going to get funding for projects that are blighted?
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
That's exactly the point of CRA. We're putting money, we're investing money specifically to get rid of blight, not to match somebody else's money. So our criteria needs to balance against the realities of the financing world. They don't want to invest in these projects. That's why we do it. But you'd rather give it to Chatsworth, where there's a lot of Section 8s, than Pacoima?
I think I'm not following the argument.
I can see that, and that's why I'm saying that I want specific answers to my questions, because I think we're setting a tone that is where the priorities are skewed in a way that it makes it more difficult for us to push for rejuvenation in blighted areas.
Mr. Reyes?
I
Oh,
think-
wait, let the...
I was going to say, sorry. His concern seems to, if I may, to be that the way the point system is currently being, as he's being reading it in the current NOFA, is that those blighted properties in which is technically CRA areas would be at a disadvantage on the scoring system. And he just wants to be sure that they're not at a disadvantage or that they're given some type of priority along the way, so that
Absolutely.
those areas could be redeveloped, continue to be redeveloped, and that our monies would be used. And I think what Helmy was trying to say is that on the flip side where where that could be, and we'll definitely take a closer look to make sure, because that is absolutely would be a concern of ours if that was true, is that most of these housing projects as they come together have so many sources of funding, and absolutely CRA is first. And one of the things I first look at is how am I going to match up the CRA money with the LAHD money with the tax credit money, because got to make this work. And so, an absolute concern. So there's many leveraging sources. So I know we get certain points for leveraging because that's how tax credits does it, that's how LAHD does it. But you're right. Anything that puts it at a disadvantage
Let me
would be
clear.
problematic.
The goal of eliminating blight shouldn't be CRAs alone. I mean, it should be everybody's concern. So we shouldn't just look to CRA to fix the blighted projects, fix the blighted areas. That should be everybody's concern.
Mr. Reyes?
Since I think the pressure points here are such that if we ask ourselves what kind of city are we evolving into, when you look at the light rail stations that are being proposed, you look at the transit-oriented districts, you look at all these new land use tools that are emerging from the planning department, and the new infrastructure that's being invested upon, given the various objectives of how we do our, how we're going to build out our subway, the Expo line. I can understand why we need to have criteria and categories so that we can have new investment in areas that are blighted, that can stimulate these job housing balances type of scenarios. But this is the juggling act. This is the hard part, is how do we not look in the rearview mirror and look what we left behind? The areas in South LA, South Central, East, Northeast, I mean, the places that have endured this historic neglect and blight, and how do we look at the preservation of those units for affordability? I mean, that's the balancing act. So you got this new trend, you've got new scenarios coming out of HACLA dealing with the new built-out environments that are being planned in Councilmember Han's district. I mean, these are the things that are very real, but we only have so much. The pie is so big. So that's when we're trying to understand this coordination, this criteria, and that's why I thought it was important to have the mayor's office here. But that's what I'm trying to get at, and how are we going to get to that point? And how we minimize the pain we're going to leave behind if we're going to be offering higher points, criteria in more well-to-do areas. I mean, how does the balancing point, how is it achieved? And I think we just can't wait for let's see who applies. I mean, do you see where I'm getting at? That's the direction I'm trying to understand. And I'm not really feeling it. I'm not hearing it.
So anyway, when we have this discussion in the new year, we definitely request that you be present as well. And I would think the order for today would be to adopt the CAO report so we can deal with this Friday. We will take item 9 and we will continue that, and that's where we'll delve deeper into this this issue. Also, Mr. Reyes, you had mentioned maybe some report backs. How do we want to factor that into the action that we're getting ready to take?
It's a timing issue. So the request was not to have to come back for every NOFA because of the timing and the efficiencies we wanted with that action. So once the first NOFA is out, how soon can we get a report back to see if it's moving the direction we thought it was before the next NOFA goes out? To give us time to understand legislatively, is there any kind of action we should be taking? What are the assumptions that we made don't pan out? And as the resources start moving in a direction that we did not intend it to. How much, I mean, where's our point of injecting our review that does not create problems for you?
Well, I think we would want to report back after we have made the decisions on the
First round.
first round. But we can do it, I think that'll be around March, mid-February or March?
Yeah, mid-late February, we'll be coming back with the recommendations for funding, and then we'll know at that time, what kind of applications we've received. And if we need to fine-tune the NOFA for the next round, which will be in April, to see if we're hitting the mark
Probably mid-March.
we want.
Okay, then we will,
Does that
again,
help with our questions now?
well, I mean,
If we're saying, if I'm saying that the scoring is biased against projects that are fixing dilapidated buildings or replacing them, I want that resolved now.
I don't believe that the scoring is biased against those types of projects. That's what I was trying to say. I
haven't heard
think,
anything to prove differently.
well, every project that we work on has multiple layers of financing, and the different departments come in at different times. And the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is the last stop before going to the state. So the Affordable Housing Trust Fund focuses on tax credit competitiveness. We do, in fact, preference projects that have leveraged other funding. And we know we're in communication with CRA. So when I talk about CRA has a requirement under redevelopment law to address blight, which LAHD and the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, even though we personally agree with that goal, that's not what our focus is. The focus is at CRA is specifically on blight removal. Any project that is coming through CRA, removing blight, demolishing buildings, and addressing those issues specifically, will come into the trust fund round with a level of competitiveness that's higher than most projects that would not have leveraged those funds.
Well, I understand that you didn't design these processes, and they're driven by federal and state rules. But that's why we continue to see blight growing, because CRA cannot handle it alone. And we've got to work harder to focus more of our attention on blighted areas. And that's fundamental to the problem. Keep spending money in nice areas. And I don't think that's good public policy. I also want to express my concern for the relationship between the Housing Department and HACLA. I'm not particularly pleased with HACLA's application to HUD in the last go-round, and particularly the processes, the roles that the residents played, and the concerns about privatization. The Petra issue has not been resolved, and I'm just concerned that HACLA is being driven by smoke and mirrors to a great degree. And I don't want to buy into smoke and mirrors. I want to know exactly what we're getting. So I don't know how to address that concern, but I'm very leery about any reliance on HACLA's positions relative to their application. Because I don't think Petra is going to pass in this Congress, and their reliance on Petra is, I think they've over-relied on Petra, and an understanding of Petra that is not going to be resolved in this Congress.
so anyway, Mr. Alarcon, I want to know, what are you comfortable with moving forward with? Would you like for me to request that they spend some time with you prior to Friday? Do we want to delve into this again at the start of the new year? So I'm trying to get a feel.
Well, I'd like to get a better sense as quickly as possible. Yes, I'd like to get a more detailed understanding personally, but I'm a little leery about saying come back in March. I mean, that's a long time. A lot
Yeah,
of things have to be
but we are kind of handcuffed as well. And then when you do come back in March, the early part of March, I would think when we have flexibility to make some changes or alterations or what have you, and then we might have a better handle on, when they come here ranking the projects or whatever, we might find out that your concerns were just, or maybe that they were not. So I just think that it would be a mistake for us not to move forward with part of this. But can you guys contact Mr. Alarcon to see if he'd want to meet with you prior to this going to council on Friday? And Mr. Reyes?
I think the understanding the weights of the criteria could perhaps shed some light on how priorities are going to be established and give us a sense of probabilities of where projects may end up. I mean, just given the weights that you're given to this criteria, I think that helps. I mean, that helped my staff and myself in reading the report.
All right, then, with, like I said, without objection, we'll adopt the CAO report. We'll add in there Mr. Reyes's amendment where it relates to a report back, which will be early March, and also we will continue item 9. So without objection, that will be the order. Is there any more business before this committee?
No, sir.
Then this committee is adjourned. No.